Welcome everyone to tonight's Tanya class. We are learning Tanya chapter 23. In Hebrew it's called Perez Gimel. Since I see there's some new people here, so I'm just going to give like a introduction to everyone on board. We've been studying the last few weeks a very important concept in mysticism, and that is the idea, in Hebrew it's called Achdus Hashem, which refers to the oneness of God. In other words, what is Achdus Hashem? What does the oneness of God mean? So we know we say in the Shema, which is the most important prayer, it says, Shema Yisrael, hear Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, God is our God, Hashem Echad. Now Echad means one. So the simple definition is one. When I say, for example, there's one watch, there's other watches, but this is the one watch that I like. But the true definition of one in oneness is that that is the only watch that exists in the world. See, if there's two watches or three or many more, it's not oneness, it's one out of many. Oneness, in the true sense of the word, is it's the only thing that exists. So when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, what are we saying? That the only real existence that exists in the world is just God. Everything is God, and God is everything. That is the idea of oneness. It's the only real existence in the world. Now, we know that God gave us the Ten Commandments. And the Ten Commandments, the first two, which we actually heard from God Himself, we were all there at Mount Sinai, is Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am God, your God. And the second one is you should not have any other. You shouldn't have any other gods. You shouldn't have any other gods. What does that mean practically? Which again, since everything goes back to the oneness of God, so the essence of all the commandments, and specifically the first two, or even more so the first one, is to know that I am the only existence. So part of the meditation and the understanding of the first commandment is that Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the only existence that exists, the only power that exists in the world is God. And that's in the positive side. And since we tend to, slip off and veer off, so La Yilacha brings you back. No, remember, there is no other God. So Anochi is the focus. I am God, your God. That's the focus. I am God, your God. La Yilacha is, no, don't slip off. Come back. There is no other gods. You can look anywhere and everywhere. You're not finding anything other than God. So one keeps you focused, and one keeps you from being unfocused. So the focus is, I am God, your God. La Yilacha is to keep you in focus. Now, so that's what we've been discussing the last few weeks about the unity of God. Today, you're going to experience a very, very, I think, one of the most profound, again, every chapter in Tanya is profound. And every one is unique because this is the foundation of mysticism. So because it's the foundation, every chapter is giving you a message that you didn't hear before, but also a message with a strong foundation that you need to really be able to connect to God in a real way. So this chapter in Tanya, I believe, is really going to change your whole experience every single time from here on you do a mitzvah, and every single time from here on you study Torah. And that is because you're going to get today a glimpse and glimmer of what takes place when you do a mitzvah from a spiritual perspective, and what takes place when you study Torah. Because, for example, we're trained, you got to study Torah, right? You got to do mitzvot, and you got to pray, which is all true. But we're going to take you to the back room and see what happens when you study Torah and when you do a mitzvah. Now, when you know from the back room what happens, guess what happens? Mitzvot take on a whole different dynamic. Studying Torah takes on a whole different dynamic. Because you're realizing the effect and the impact you're having on yourself and that you're having on the world. So, Tanya, in this week, in this chapter that we're studying this week, chapter 23, the author comes and introduces to us a teaching of the Zohar, which we know is the Kabbalah, and based on this teaching, we're going to have a whole different view of what happens when you study Torah and the mitzvot. So it says in the Zohar as follows: Oraisa v'kutchabrichu kuluchad. What does that mean? Torah and God is one. In other words, when Torah and God is one, in one. Now, the reality is like this. What did we just say before? That everything is God. So if everything is God, what's the big novel idea that the Zohar is putting on the table that Torah and God is one. If I tell you, guess what? I'm going to teach you something now. The table and God is one. It is one. The chair and God is one. We and God is one. So what does it mean when the Zohar tells us that Torah and God is one? Everything is one with God. So what does that mean? It means very simple. The truth is that everything is one with God. The table, the chair, the Torah, everything. The us, him, her, whoever it may be. What's the difference? The difference is very simple. In order for God to create this physical world, He had to create a tzimtzum, a concealment of the infinite power, or in Hebrew it's called a hester panim, where God's hiding His face, God's hiding His power, God's hiding His energy, and therefore what we see in this physical world, we don't say, oh, here's God, we say, here's a table, or here's a chair, or here's this person, that person, here's a book, a bookshelf, lights, etc. Here's a building, a car, right? Because why do we say that? Why don't we say here's God, God, God? And the answer is very simple. It's God concealed Himself. And because God concealed Himself, our initial reaction for us living in this physical, materialistic world is what we call it, whatever the name that's given to it. However, the Zohar says, when you study Torah, and we're going to talk about it in depth, when you study Torah, guess what? This is one with God. There's no concealment there. When you take out a Chumash or a Mishnah or a Talmud or some mysticism and you study Torah, guess what? All the concealments go away. And you are connecting right now with God Himself. Then the Zohar goes on to say, actually in Tikunei Zohar, not in the Zohar itself, in Tikunei Zohar says as follows, that the 248 commandments, now you're going to ask me the 613, and the answer is, there's 613 commandments. There's 248 positive commandments, and there's 365 negative commandments. So the 365 negative commandments, we're going to talk about that next week, or in the next chapter of Tanya, chapter 24. Chapter 24 will deal with the negative commandments. But this week we're talking about the positive commandments, and the positive is 248 commandments. So the Zohar says, Ramach Pikudim, which is again the 248 commandments, positive commandments, Inun, they are Ramach Evarin the Malka, 248 limbs of God. Now, you notice the difference? When it came to Torah, what did the Zohar say? That it's one. When you study Torah, that's one. However, the commandments are limbs of God. Now, what does that mean, limbs of God? Well, one thing you can see, it's not God. It's not one with God. It's limbs of God. We have to understand what it means, limbs of God. But you see already, it's not one. So, but the point is, when you do a mitzvah, when a person does it according to the Zohar, simple Zohar, we're going to get into it, explain what it means practically. But according to the simple Zohar, anytime you do one of the positive commandments, again, the negative, that's next week, or next chapter of Tanya, but anytime you do a positive commandment, keep kosher, keep Shabbat, put on tefillin, light the Shabbos candles or mezuzah, whatever it may be, anytime you do a positive commandment, there's 248, we're not going to list them all right now, you are basically connecting with God like a limb. Now, what does that mean? Okay. So now we have to understand, obviously it's Zohar, it's Kabbalah. Now, in order to, the one line in Kabbalah, one line in Zohar, we can talk about it for hours, days, years, and months. So we're going to now take a journey into what the Zohar is telling us, and this will hopefully give us a better understanding of the idea of Achdus Hashem, the oneness of God, in relation to what? Doing mitzvot and studying Torah. So let's start first with the idea of mitzvot. Why? Because what did the Zohar say? That the 248 mitzvot is like the limbs of God. What does that mean? So we know like this. There is 10 sfirot. As we discussed last week, and we discussed many times in the class, there are 10 sfirot, starting from Keter, and then obviously you don't count Das, through Malchut. There's a total of 10 sfirot. What is the highest sfira? The highest sfira is Keser. In Keser, there's two levels. There's Tainung, which is a deep pleasure, and then there's Ratzon, which is the will. Now, what is the highest power that a person has that's conscious of. He's conscious of his will. He wants. So obviously, tithing is higher and deeper, but a conscious something that a person wants knows tithing is an internal pleasure. Rtzon, I want something. It's already external, but I want it. So when a person wants something, guess what happens? You get it. Why? Because you want it. You get it. If a person says, "I think I might like it," it's almost like, maybe you really shouldn't like it. It's not so good for you. The intellect is not as powerful as will. Let's say someone says, I enjoy this. A low-level joy, chesed, gevura, tiferes, whatever it may be. Okay, fine, so you get it, you don't get it, it's not the end of the world. But when you decide you want something, the expression in English is, when there's a will, there's a way. Exactly. So, Ratzon is very, very powerful. Now, God had a Ratzon, a will. What was his will? God wanted, as it says in Kabbalah and Zohar, God wanted Liyas Baruch to have for himself a dira, a dwelling place, where? Bitachtonim. Now what does tachtonim mean? In a very low place. Now what does it mean low? God's all over. We mean low. God's all over. We mean high, low. Is there higher and lower for God? God is here. God's there. What's the difference? It's all God. But when we say higher and low, what do we refer to? We're referring to God's revelation or God's concealment. So obviously the place higher means God's concealed. As God conceals himself, we're going lower and lower in the presence of God. So in a place where God is revealed, God's revealed, he's there in a revealed way. But God went ahead, and obviously God's infinite, so he can create a place where he is, but he really looks like he isn't. And he concealed himself where? In this physical materialistic world. There's a world of Atzilut, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. Again, another discussion, another class. But the point is, this physical world that we live in is called Tachtonim, low, and actually it doesn't get lower than this materialistic world. A place where God is not felt, and God is really concealed, unless you really make the effort. You make the effort. But if you don't make the effort, God is concealed. God said, guess what? I'm going to create this materialistic world where I'm not technically present, even though God's everywhere, and I want to be felt there. I want that my presence should be noticed by somebody. And therefore he created us with a mind and a heart and an ability to search, to look for meaning, and to find God. And when we find God, guess what happens? God's happy. It's like you ever play a game hide and go seek, and you're hiding, but you hide so well, and then all of a sudden everyone stops looking for you. Guess what happens? How do you feel? You've gone and forgotten. Exactly. You feel like you're lonely. Come on, well, you guys forgot about me. Exactly. And what happens when we stop looking for God? You know how God feels? The same exact way. He feels lonely. No one's looking for him. But when you look for God and you find him, what happens when your friend finds you after looking for you for a long time, when you hide real well? So you ever hide in a washing machine or a dryer? Oh. Right? And someone puts it on my mistake. I'm just kidding. I'm not giving you any wild ideas. But the point I'm making is that if you ever hide real well and someone finds you, how's the excitement? For both of you, it's great, right? That's the same thing what happens. When a person looks for God in places where you would never think he is, and you make a blessing, and you study Torah, and you do mitzvot, and you pray, when it's least expected, how do you feel? Great. How do you think God feels? Great. Even greater, right? He feels good. He feels wonderful. Why? Because you looked for him, and you didn't stop looking for him. Our job is to keep on looking for God. God's job is to keep on concealing himself. And then we have a beautiful activity that lasts forever. And it's exciting. Because if God was always revealed, guess what our job would be? Nothing. He's revealed. Life is wonderful. When God's concealed and you have to look for God, now we have excitement, sometimes drama, right? But it's the best exercise you can do, is to keep on looking for God. Because guess why? Because since God is infinite, is the game ever over? No. Because whenever you find him, guess what? There's more to him, and you keep on looking. Okay, so God wanted to have a dwelling place in this world. Now, how's he going to do that? Very simple. He created a world that's devoid on a physical level or an appearance level of any spirituality, any godliness. And he said, guess what? Here's how the game works of life. I'm going to give you a Torah. In the Torah, there's commandments. Remember, 613? For this week, we're talking about the positive ones. 248 mitzvot. Anytime you do a mitzvah, means anytime you do one of the 248 mitzvot, guess what happens now? You are fulfilling my dream. Because you are doing what I really wanted. I wanted you in this physical world where it's, oh, I'm going to get up and put on tefillin today. I'm not putting on tefillin today. I'm too tired, right? I have work to do. I have errands to do. And you say, no, God, I know I have errands and I'd rather not do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Guess what? At that moment, you found God. And you know what? Kosher food, too expensive, too burdensome. Maybe I'll buy something not kosher. No. You know what? I'm going to stop. I'm going to buy kosher, right? Guess what happens at that moment? You found God. You created a relationship. At that moment, you created a spark. What spark? Going back to the original Ratzon, the will of God, His internal will, that we, in this world, Jews should do the 613 commandments, non-Jews the 7 Noahide laws, and any time when a person does one of those mitzvot, guess what happens?
God isn't lonely anymore.
He's not lonely. Exactly. So in other words, to make it clear, so what happens when a person does a mitzvah? He is fulfilling the internal will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now think about that. Take for a moment, think about it. Anytime you do a mitzvah, again, there's 248 to choose from, giving charity, right? You could have bought yourself some extra clothing, or maybe take an extra trip, or whatever it may be. Put it away for your savings, right? Or put it for your kids. And you take out and you say, I'm going to give tithing. I'm going to give 10% to charity. Or whatever you give to charity. At that moment, what happens? You are fulfilling God's commandment in the Torah to give charity. Guess what happens now? It's like ringing the bell. God, I still remember you. Every time, right, you do a mitzvah, you're ringing a bell. And God says, oh my gosh, guess what? They remembered me. Think about it. How do you think God feels? He feels great. And guess how many times you can ring the bell? As many times as you want. As many times as you want. It's very simple. Pull any one of the 248 mitzvot, positive, and guess what? Boom, you're ringing a nice bell. How does it feel when you ring the bell? You feel great because you're the one that caused the bell to ring. And God feels great because they remember the plan. And they stuck to the plan, and they're actually doing the mitzvot. Now, so that is basically what happens when you do a mitzvah, in a beautiful way. So then the question is, if that's really what happens when you do a mitzvah, technically what are you doing? You're really becoming one with God. But how come in the Zohar, does he only call it it's only one of the limbs of God? It's God himself. This is what God wanted. So the Alter Rebbe explains a fascinating insight, and he says very simple. Because what is the will of God? The will of God is that you should connect with Him. That you should be one with Him. That is the will of God. How do you do it? Through a medium of fulfilling one of the 248 positive commandments. So when you fulfill the commandment, it's true, there's you, there's God, and through the commandment you're connecting to God. But you're not touching God himself. See, there's an intermediary. There's a commandment. It's great. Again, it's a beautiful, powerful connection. No one's knocking the connection. But you'll soon see why the distinction between doing a mitzvah and studying Torah. The point the Alter Rebbe is explaining is the reason why the Zohar calls it like a limb, it's very simple. Because, let's say for example, you as a human being, right? You're sitting and also you say you want to move your hand, right? Your hand, your feet. So there's you, whoever you are, and then there's your hands. Now your hands move automatic as you give it a message to move. But the hand is not you. You are your godly soul that's within you. So true, your hands, it's your feet, it's your head, but it's still not you, the essence of who you are. The same thing also, when you do a mitzvah, yes, you're doing God's will, but what's God's will? God's will is that you should have a relationship with Him, and you should do His will. But you're doing His will through an intermediary.
Limb.
A limb, just like a limb, exactly. Now, it's interesting is, the Zohar says that the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were like chariots to the will of God. Now, what do you mean they were like chariots to the will of God? Think about it. What does a chariot do? A chariot is a chariot, but it does what the rider wants it to do. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they were like chariots. What does that mean? They always and consistently and constantly did the will of Hashem. So we obviously would love to follow and emulate in the ways of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. How do we do that? Very simple. By doing the will of Hashem. And as long as we keep on doing the will of Hashem, we become one with God. Obviously, through the intermediary of the mitzvah, we become one with God. Okay. So that is all when it comes to what? When it comes to the idea of doing a mitzvah. However, what did the Zohar say? Now we're going to go to the higher level. What did the Zohar say? That when a person, Torah is one with God. It's the same thing. In other words, the Alter Rebbe explains that when a person studies Torah, guess what happens now? When you're studying Torah, think about this. You're a human being. God gave you a brain. God gave you a mouth. God gave you a heart. And everything else that He gave you. But let's use, for example, these three components. Your mind, your speech, and your heart. And let's say you're sitting down now and you're saying we're studying Torah. Now, how are you studying Torah? You're using your brain. So you use your brain and you use your mouth. So when you sit and study Torah, so you take out a Chumash, or a Mishnah, or some Talmud, or some commentaries, or Tanya, or some other books on mysticism, and you take the book and you read the words. Because if you look at the words, you're not studying Torah. It's like watching something, right? The way you study Torah, you actually say the words. It's very, very important when you study Torah to say the words. You have to scream it, the whole room hears it, but you have to pronounce the words. So if you're learning Chumash, right, you say Bereshis, Bara, right? You have to say the words. Again, you don't have to, again, you can say it in a proper tone, depending on who else is in the room. If no one's in the room, you can scream as much as you want on top of your lungs. I know certain people love, studying very, very loud. It's okay as long as you're not disturbing anybody, because in the Torah it tells you to be protective of other people, not disturb and bother other people, right? And irritate other people. So you got to be careful with that. Okay, back to the point. So what happens when a person studies Torah? You sit with your mouth and you're actually reciting the words of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elokim, or if it's Mishnah, right, Shnei Moksum Matalis, or if it's Talmud, whatever it may be, or it's mysticism, you're reading the words of that. Now, in order to study Torah, we're not saying, you see, reading Psalms or praying, so you read the words. Some words you understand, some words you don't understand, etc. Studying Torah, what does studying mean? Now, once you read the words, right, Bereshit in the beginning, bara created, Elokim, God. Now, what does God want you to do when you study Torah? To think about what you just said. You said the word Bereshis. What does Bereshis mean? So either you know the translation, or you get an English translation, or you speak Spanish as a Spanish translation, whatever, it's Russian, whatever it may be, you read and you comprehend, oh, in the beginning. And then you go more in depth. Wow, Rashis means the beginning. Why is it Bereshis, in the beginning? And we know the Beis is referring to two beginnings, and so on and so forth. So as you start thinking of what you're studying, now what's happening now? Whatever you're reading and verbalizing and articulating, you're starting to process in your brain, and then you think about it.
You think what you read out loud.
You think about it, and then if you're studying with a study partner, so you can discuss it. Hey, what do you think about this? And the person says, well, what does that mean? And so on and so forth. And you get into an intense conversation about something you're learning. That's called Limud Torah. Limud Torah is I read, I comprehend, and it's always best actually to study with a study partner. Because what happens when you study with yourself, which is okay. I'm not saying you shouldn't study with yourself, but it's always better to study with a study partner. Because when you study with a study partner, guess what happens?
More depth?
There's much more depth. Exactly. There's much more depth. And also, you don't get lost in your own thoughts and your own opinions, what the Torah says. Like, you can come with this idea, and the person says, well, what does it say? Like, you're making this up. See, with yourself, you can tell yourself any story. You know why? Because, hey, the only one that's there is you. So you can tell yourself any story and you can believe anything you want to believe. But once you're there with somebody else, guess what? Now there's checks and balances. Where'd you get that from? Can you show it to me inside? As a matter of fact, there's a rule. Like if someone wants to say, I want to ask you a question in the Torah. The rule is, show me inside. Because what happens, they ask you a question, they built a whole bridge and it never even existed. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why we read from the Torah on Monday, Thursday, Shabbat, holidays, from a Torah which is written on parchment with ink, which is verified. Today they verify by computer, but someone actually checks it from a previous Torah to make sure that there's no one's adding in anything and no one's taking anything out. So you make sure it's authenticated. That's why it's important to study with a study partner. So back, when you're studying with a study partner, again, whatever you're studying with a study partner, now it's going into your brain. And you discuss, and you're going into deeper, and you think about it, and you ask questions, and sometimes you actually, like for many hours, you can really think of what does it mean, and how do I understand it? And there's so many levels of depth that when you study Torah. Now, the reality is, think about this. Whose Torah are you studying? Whose ideas are this?
God's.
God's. It's God's idea. Everything that's in the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, the writings, which is the written part of the Torah, and the oral part of the Torah that was given over to Moses, right? The Mishnah, the Talmud, etc., and all of mysticism that was taught to us by powerful people that all wrote down with divine prophecy. Guess what happens? It's all God's information. Now, when you're saying the words of Torah, whose words are you saying? God's words. When you're thinking about the words of Torah, whose words are you thinking about? God's words. As you're meditating in depth, and it's going into the depth of your brain, and how deep is our brain? We all know that we use maybe like a 3% to 5% of our brain. Guess what happens when you study Torah? You start using more percent. More. And you go deeper. Guess what? You can never get to 100%. Don't worry. You're not going to break your brain over studying Torah. You can study and it'll never crack. I can guarantee you.
Your brain.
You cannot overdo it on your brain. You can't. No one has ever done it so far. By the way, and there's studies, there are studies that after people passed away, when they did certain brain scans, people that actually studied intensely, they saw more parts of their brain actually, strained or used, etc.
That's right. You know that Einstein, when he died at 77, he had the brain of a 33-year-old.
Yes, correct. I heard that. He never aged, exactly. So back to the point. So when a person studies Torah, again, you're saying words from God, you're thinking words of God. So guess where's God? In you, in your brain, in your mouth. And not only in your brain, in your mouth, but when you get excited about what you study, it trickles down to where? Your heart. And there's certain joy you get from, and we all know that because we study Torah, and we know how happy we are when we study Torah, right? When you really study Torah and you think about what you're learning, you become happy. So it goes into your heart, and it even creates a smile on your face. So look at that. Who's doing all that? It's God that you brought into you in a real way, in a very tangible way, and literally made God part of your life.
And you have joy in your life.
And you have joy. Now, so therefore, when you study Torah, whose Torah is it? It's God Himself. God's ideas. God's thoughts. God's writing. So when you're connecting to God through studying Torah, is that unity? Or what?
Yes.
That is unity.
Yep.
Through an intermediary? No, it's God Himself. See, when you're doing a mitzvah, for example, so let's say you're putting on tefillin. So God wanted you to connect to Him. So He said, use black boxes and put it on you. So true, everything is God. The black boxes are God. But there's an intermediary of a box that's connecting you to God Himself. Here, you're bringing God Himself within you. I mean, could you get to a greater unity than that? No greater than unity than that. Now, because when a person studies Torah, you are doing what? You're bringing God literally within you. So now think about it. The next time you sit down to study Torah, or you're doing a mitzvah, and you say, hold on a second, wow, I am going now to bring God within me. Isn't that going to change the whole experience?
Yes.
When you're doing a mitzvah, you realize, oh my gosh, I'm actually connecting with God. Isn't that going to make a different experience now to doing a mitzvah? You're not just doing an act that someone asked you to do, your dad or your mom or your teacher, and you're just doing it. And even if you're disciplined and you're respectful, here you're actually realizing that when you're doing this mitzvah, guess what? Where's the bell ringing? In God's ears. And when you're studying Torah, you're bringing God within you. Now.
And the God in you connects with the God in that person.
Correct. So what happens is, the Alter Rebbe explains that when a person studies Torah, this is what takes place on a spiritual level. We know that there's something which is called the infinite light of God, or Ein Sof. Now, in order for God to create this materialistic world, He had to make a tzimtzum. He had to conceal the infinite light. Right. The more He concealed it, And the more we're able to, obviously, in this materialistic world, enjoy the world. And we get a little bit, glimmers of holiness and spirituality, etc.
Otherwise, the light is too bright.
Too big. So we have the godly light in this world is internalized, but it's a very dim light.
Yeah.
Now, can you imagine if God all of a sudden opened up the light and expanded the light? No, it wouldn't work. Now, so therefore, but on the other hand, such a light does exist. In Hebrew, it's called, in the world of Kabbalah, it's called Oir HaMakif. What does it mean it's a makif? Makif means you cannot internalize it. If you internalize it, you explode. So there's a powerful light that hovers over each and every one of us. Hovers, obviously, in the higher worlds. We cannot bring that powerful light internalized, because then it would explode. It's like, for example, if you have a cup of 8 ounces of water, you can put in 8 ounces. If you have a cup that can hold 8 ounces, you can put in 8 ounces. What happens all of a sudden you want to put in a gallon of water and you force it in there, the cup will shatter. You can't do it. But on the other hand, it's good to have the gallon on the side. You know why? Because when you finish your cup of 8 ounces, guess what? Take the gallon and put in another 8 ounces and you can drink it. So you need a gallon, or 10 gallons, or 100 gallons, but you cannot internalize that only 8 ounces at a time. That's the laws of nature. The same thing also, Ur Makif and Ur Pnimi. Ur Pnimi means the amount of light, the amount of connection I can have with God is very, very limited. However, there is an infinite connection. I can't have that. There's one way you can have that. That is how? By studying Torah. Because when you're studying Torah, guess what? You're actually internalizing it. Because think about it. You bring it into your mouth, into your mind, and you're internalizing what? The infinite power of God that normally you cannot internalize. The only way you can gain and connect to that infinite power is only through Torah study. That's point number one, the Alter Rebbe explains. Point number two is, what happens when you study Torah is as follows. We know that in the Ethics of Our Fathers that we actually study in the summer, the Mishnah says that im ein yira, if there's no awe for God, ein chachma, there's no wisdom. And then it says im ein chachma, there's no wisdom, ein yira, there's no awe for God. So the question is asked, is this a joke? Hey, either you're telling me that awe, yira comes first and then chachma goes, or you're telling me that chachma comes first, then awesome for God goes first. Which one is correct? Yeah. So the Alter explains based on this concept of a beautiful explanation that's as follows. In order to have a relationship with God, in order to sit down and study Torah and connect to God by studying Torah, or in order to doing a mitzvah and really appreciate the connection and connect to God by doing the mitzvah or praying, a person has to have respect for God. In Hebrew it's called yira, in English it's called respect, reverence, awe for God. Matter of fact, before you study Torah, you have to make a blessing. Mean to say is, you can't disrespect God and expect to be able to accept from Him any blessing or any light. So the first thing is, you want to study Torah, you want to pray, you want to do mitzvot, you want to have a relationship with God. Okay, so first have respect for God. And that's why the Mishnah says, Im ein yira, ein chachma. You want to have wisdom, you want to have a relationship with God, you have to have the basic respect to realize, God created the world, God is a powerful God, and you know what? As much as I don't understand it, I'm limited, I'm finite, but I respect God, even though I don't get it. Now let me see what He has to say. Let me study Torah, let me pray, let me do a mitzvah, etc. I'm coming from a place of respect. When you're coming from a place of respect, you made yourself an opening, you made yourself a vessel, and you'll be able to appreciate and have a good relationship with God. And like in any relationship, if you don't respect the person, how can you have a relationship? So you need to have a basic respect. Basic. Now, so if that's the case, so you have awe, and you have wisdom, so what's this awe at the end? So the Alter explains, and here comes the huge prize that happens once you start studying Torah. Once a person studies Torah on a daily basis, and for example, when you study Torah, you're saying the words of God, and you're thinking about God, not thinking about God, you're actually internalizing God's wisdom into your brain, what happens to you? Think about it. You just now brought in this infinite power that we discussed before of God into your brain, into your mouth, it trickles down to your heart. You all of a sudden, guess what? You get a different set of eyes. All of a sudden your horizon opens up. You have you broadened your whole concept of reality. You're able to see things literally from a different perspective. What does that mean? Yes. Because you're seeing things now from godly eyes. Because your eyes now become godly. Because you just now took in a powerful spiritual medicine, which is called Torah, and because you see God and godliness, and you now have a whole different reality of what's taking place in the world, guess what happens now?
Love everybody.
For sure you love everybody, but you get this beautiful aura of awe that comes upon you, and it's awesome. It's awesome. Now, therefore, the more you study Torah, the more you can have a different perspective. Now, what happens is like this. A person can say, hold on, great. I'm committed. I love this idea. I'm going to study Torah. Why? Because I want to connect with God. I respect God. I'm going to study Torah. And then guess what, Rabbi? I studied for hours and days. I don't feel it. I don't see it. So the Alter Rebbe says two things. There's two reasons why it could be. One is because if God totally allowed himself to be revealed through the Torah that you're studying with you, when you study, there's no question the revelation takes place. But because your soul is in a body, and if the revelation was really exploding, you know what would happen to you? You would explode, and you wouldn't exist in this world. So therefore, even though it's there, and your soul sees it and feels it, it doesn't allow it to break its bounds. In other words, as the expression in Zohar says, Afal Gad, even though the iyu lo chaza, you don't see it, but your mazel, your soul, your spiritual counterpart sees it and feels it. So even though you might not feel it, but your soul sees it. So you can ask yourself, why don't I see it? If my soul sees it, why can't I see it? So the Alter Rebbe explains, and we discussed this once before, but I'm explaining it now because it talks about in this chapter, is that when God created us human beings, He created us with a physical body, but He also gave us a soul. Now, this soul that He gave us, as we discussed, it comes down from God, from the infinite power of God, and it goes through all the four different worlds, Atzilut, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, and then it comes into the body. Now, how long does it take for the journey to come down? It takes 9 months, right? While the mother is pregnant with the child, it takes 9 months. Now, what happens in that 9 months, so it has to go through a journey of 4 worlds. Atzilut, namely, being the world that's totally infinite with God. Bria is already a creation, so obviously the light's starting to gets more dimmed. Yitzira already is formation. It means as there's formation, there's less of God's revelation. And then there's the world of physical reality. That means there's even less of God's revelation. So what happens as the soul goes down, from where God's more revealed, not physically higher and lower, but God's more revealed to where God's less revealed. So the journey takes place, everyone has their own journey. That means, so for example, the example is given as Moses. Moses spent 9 months, or 8.9% of the 9 months, in the world of Atzilut, right, with God's reality. The last second, he took a super jet down to this materialistic world. He opens his eyes in this world. Guess what? He is called in the world of Kabbalah a neshama of Atzilut. What does that mean? He still sees only godliness. Even though he's living in this world, he just sees God and godliness. Therefore, when he studies Torah, and we know Moshe Rabbeinu went up to God to receive the Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu knew the Torah. He saw the Torah. He was living the Torah because his soul was on a very high level. However, and I'll give you another extreme case, you can have a soul that spent 9 months. As soon as he was told he's coming down, he went straight into the world of Asiya before he came out. He spent 99% of the time in the world of Asiya, then he comes out into this world. So when he comes out into this world, what is he used to seeing? Materialism. He was cultivated for 9 months in a place where materialism was reality. So you try to talk to him anything spiritual, and he sits down and studies Torah. Even though the Torah is going within him, he doesn't feel it. Why? Because his soul is a very, very down-to-earth soul. And again, obviously I gave you 2 extremes, but there's multiple levels in between. But because the person's soul, whatever level is, let's say on the lower echelon, right, where it's basically in the world of materialism, so he can sit and study Torah and do mitzvot, etc., guess what? He's not going to feel it or see it. So, therefore, does that mean he shouldn't do it? No. Because even though he doesn't see it, the effect is still there. Because when a person, irrelevant whether you see it or feel it, the reality is, if and when you study Torah, you are bringing God into every part of your physical being, into your mind, and into your heart. As long as you study Torah and continue to studying Torah. So in other words, to recap, the truth is that God is where? Everywhere. There is no place where God is not. However, God is concealed in this world. So the truth is, everything is really part of the oneness of God. However, because God's concealed, there are places where God is more revealed. We'll go from the bottom to the top. First level is when you do a mitzvah. When you do a mitzvah, so there's you, there's God, and there's the medium that you can connect to God through the mitzvah. And when a person does a mitzvah, you are creating a oneness experience that's much more revealed when you're not doing a mitzvah. If you're not doing a mitzvah, there's you and you're sleeping, you're daydreaming, right? Where's God? I don't know, right? He's there, but everyone's sleeping. But when you're doing a mitzvah, all of a sudden, guess what? You're ringing a strong bell, God hears the bell, and there's a connection, there's a oneness. So any time we go ahead and do a mitzvah, guess what? Should we just do it because, all right, I guess I got to do this? Or no, when you're ready to ring that bell, boom, right? You ring it. Because right now I'm connecting to God. So every time we go ahead and we do one of the 248 positive mitzvahs, we are creating what? A oneness experience with God. Now, what's higher than that? When you sit and study Torah, whether it's at night or in the morning or in the car, or if you're listening to a Torah thought on the phone or on the internet or on, at work, whatever it may be, or in a real story session, what's happening at that moment is you are connecting to God in the most powerful oneness connections that's possible. There's no other greater connection. Even the higher worlds don't have that connection because they only have a ray of God. When you study Torah, you have God Himself. And that creates a tremendous, beautiful experience of oneness that you cannot create by doing anything else in the world. And that's why Torah study is very, very important. As a matter of fact, even according to Jewish law, if you're sitting and studying Torah, and let's say all of a sudden someone needs you to do a mitzvah. Now we know mitzvahs are important. If there's no one else to do the mitzvah, fine, so you have to go do the mitzvah. But if there's someone else to do the mitzvah, stay and study Torah. Why? Because Torah study gives you that connection. And as long as you're studying Torah, guess what? You'll be doing a lot of mitzvahs, guaranteed. Because what happens is if you study Torah, you'll be doing mitzvot. And if you do mitzvot and you don't study Torah, after a while, the mitzvot become dry. So the Torah is the fuel that allows you. Now, the reality is that prayer, in a certain regard, is like Torah study, because when you pray, you're becoming one with God. But still, Torah is always more powerful. Because by Torah, you are taking God and internalizing Him in the most deepest possible ways. So I think on a practical level now is like, the summer. So we know the summer you have bigger days. So it's important to try to find some extra time and study more Torah, because through Torah study, you and I can create the greatest connection with God in true oneness and unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu.